but first and foremost, he wanted to protect his child, so he stood in front of her. Our heroine wondered if he could smell something, but this only spurred her on to action. Now was the perfect moment. She forced herself to forget about the fear of being caught. Telling herself that she had to kill him, she swung her dagger, but the Duke was on his guard. It was not for nothing that he was known for his insight, so he was able to intercept her weapon. My Lord Roderick did it automatically, but when he realized who had struck the blow, he was surprised. Blood gushed from his palm, but he ignored it and asked why she did it. She sternly demanded that he not call her by that name, because she had never been his daughter. She was pleased. She had succeeded. She didn't have to inflict a mortal wound on him. The poison on the dagger will finish the job, and even the Duke's strong body will not withstand it. The body of my lord was already under the influence of the poison. He swayed and began to fall with her name on his lips. It was hard for him to speak, but he fought until the end. He needed to ask her forgiveness. Our heroine looked at the dying Duke, watching as the last of his strength left him. Standing over him, she repeated that she was not his biological daughter and should not be called Ayla. Another character appeared in the room and said that the Duke had finally fallen. In a satisfied tone, he said that he had warned that this day would come and had kept his promise. My Lord Roderick recognized Byron, and he answered how one could forget the name of the one he had betrayed. While the man who entered was delivering his speech, our heroine was thinking about only one thing: her father's name. Byron added that the Duke had stolen everything from him, and he had spent years thinking about how to kill him in an instructive way. He said that today he finally did it, then said goodbye to his old friend. Handing over his glass, Byron thanked his daughter for a homework assignment well done, and he suggested that she raise a toast to this because it would make her feel better. However, our heroine is worried about only one thing, and she has been waiting for this for a long time. She wanted to know her name. Byron replied that they should have a drink first and could talk later. Then he took the dagger. She trusted this man with all her heart, so she agreed that talking could wait. When she had drained her glass, he said that her name was Ayla hailing Vashaven, and that she was the daughter of a duke. He said that many years ago he kidnapped her and raised her as his own daughter, and then he forced him to kill his father with his own hands and ended his speech by saying that this was his revenge. She felt sick. She tried to understand whether she really felt so bad because of this story. Suddenly, the thought occurred to her that Byron could have poisoned not only his enemy. Our heroine vomited blood mixed with wine, and she raised her gaze to the man. Then he said sarcastically that he felt sick just looking at her, at those blue eyes. Exactly the same as her real father's. He reveled in the fact that he killed both her and the Duke in the same day. She could no longer stand on her feet, but she could still hear his words that this was an act of mercy. He said the only thing that didn't bother him was her hair. It was the same as her mother's. Byron was triumphant. He thought how sweet revenge is, and asked the girl not to worry. Not to worry, because her mother, Ophelia, will happily continue to live next to him. Our heroine's strength was leaving her. Everything was blurry before her eyes, and she could hardly see. Her last thought was that Ophelia was her real mother, and she was alive. She looked at the father she had killed, and thought that now the truth no longer mattered. What was the point of finding out? She was dying. But for some reason, she felt responsible for her actions. Our heroine opened her eyes and looked at such a familiar interior. She tried to understand what was happening, while she knew exactly what her body felt. She could smell, hear all the sounds. She could feel everything that was happening around her. Sitting up on the bed, she thought in amazement that this could have happened. She was dead. Then she heard a familiar voice that said that since she was awake, she needed to wash her face. The maid reminded that the lady had morning training before lunch with the master. She remembered Laura. But why was the maid here, when she had disappeared when she was 16? Memory reminded her that it was just before she went to the Duke's house. Looking closely at Laura's face, our heroine thought that it was too young. The maid said again about training, and that I needed to wash and change clothes as soon as possible. What was happening seemed strange to her, and looking at her reflection, she realized that she, too, had grown younger. She wanted to ask the maid questions to clarify the situation, but she had already left. Then she decided to figure out what was happening herself. She clearly remembered the day she died. It was the day before her coming of age, and a ball was arranged for the occasion at the Vashaven's house. There was also a formal announcement of the heir. It was a turbulent and important time. But then she didn't look so young. It turned out that she had returned to her teenage years. She went back in time, and she was Ayla hailing Vashaven, and all her memories remained with her. Suddenly, she had another chance to take revenge on her father's offender. The maid was yelling at the young lady, asking if she didn't like her morning workouts. Our heroine, having answered that she was running, continued her run along the trampled path. Laura said that she should behave more decently, or she would tell the gentleman, and he would be upset. Ayla remembered that the maid was always like this. She always acted as if she was the master. Before living with the Vashaven family, Ayla hadn't even realized that this attitude was wrong. But she was not Byron's real daughter, and they treated her as they pleased. Despite this, the girl still tried to look and cope excellently in front of her father and Laura. She watched their mood tirelessly, forcing herself to smile, pretending to be an idiot. But now everything was different. She decided that she had enough. She was tired of putting on these false smiles. She decided that she would obey orders, but only she would know where to point her blade. All that mattered to our heroine was to take advantage of this sudden chance. In this life, she would do so. She was going to stain these hands with the blood of that very devil, Byron. Claude appeared on the path. He had been teaching her all the time she had lived under Byron's rule. She considered the man who kidnapped her to be dirty because he raised a child to become a murderer. Claude, meanwhile, asked why she was late, if something had happened, or if she had simply overslept. After apologizing, she followed Claude, who advised her to have a good time with the owner. She remembered that he had always been like this. He had always had this strange obsession with her. Meanwhile, Claude announced that they were starting weapons training today. Looking at my hands, I tried to remember if they were just starting now. She didn't find a single scratch, but she had often been wrong before and had a lot of cuts. This gave her a clue. Now she understood that it was the summer before her 13th birthday. This meant that she still had 4 years left before she entered the Duke's estate. Claude suggested that they start by warming up, and to do this, as usual, they would run around the area. He pulled her out of her thoughts, but gave her another thought. Now she knew what would happen next. At least, mostly, so I decided that now would be a good time to test my physical strength. It was important to her, so she took off and ran to her favorite tree. She easily grabbed the lower branch and continued moving upward with quick movements. Ayla felt her muscles tense, and with each new grip, it became easier. The wind played with her hair, creating a feeling of freedom and lightness on this high-altitude climb. Her body still remembered the movements, and she was pleased that she could perform them without any problems. So I thought that if I trained constantly, I would become stronger and faster than last time. Then perhaps she will be able to move to the Duke of Vashaven's estate earlier than expected. But this thought was clouded by the memory that Byron had placed a curse on her. He only took it off when she moved in with the Duke, and she didn't even know how it worked. But she knew that if she crossed Byron, she would end up dead. This fear has controlled her life for many years, and now she finds it suspicious. After all, why remove the leash before giving freedom? But that was not the only thing that did not add up. I thought about Byron's true identity and the never-ending flow of money that supported him, about a conspiracy that turned out to be too large-scale, and its connection with her real father. She wondered what really happened between them, what he had lost, and what her mother had to do with it. She remembered Byron talking about some place that had been stolen from him, but she didn't know what his ultimate goal was, and didn't yet understand how she could figure it out. She knew one thing. Now she couldn't openly fight back. She wasn't in the position to help her. Her attention was drawn to the building, or rather the floor where her room was located. But something was wrong. She knew for sure that her chambers were the only ones on the floor. I thought that maybe she was confused about something, or maybe there was another room there. It dawned on her that perhaps everything would change once she found the secret passage. After all, this way she has the opportunity to learn about Byron's plans. You might even be able to hear what's going on outside the walls of the estate. This thought gave her hope, and she ran without looking where she was going, and did not see the puddle. I was a little upset that I got dirty, but it was only a momentary sadness. She thought she would check everything tonight, and this was much more important. Looking at her reflection in a puddle, she unexpectedly came to a conclusion. How could she not see her father and the Duke? Because they really are so similar. The thought dampened her high spirits, but she had no time to be despondent. Ayla didn't want to give in to sadness. She wanted to go back to her father and fix everything. Walking briskly along the path, She thought that it did not matter how difficult and dangerous the path would be. Our heroine promised herself that she would definitely cope, even if she had to smile falsely. She knew Byron was waiting for her now to have lunch together, so she hurried. But one day, she will definitely ask her parents for forgiveness for what she did. And even though she was about to have a completely different meeting now, she knew she could change everything. Opening the door to the dining room, our heroine paused for a second to prepare herself. And then, with a radiant smile on her lips, she came in and asked how her father was doing. Byron, holding out his hand to her, replied that it was fine and asked her to come over and look at it. Stroking her head, he said that Laura reported that she had overslept, and about the fact that I barely made it to training. Then he asked why. Maybe something happened. In a quiet voice, she asked for forgiveness, and then explained that she had had a nightmare. Then, Byron kindly asked her to tell him about this night vision. Our heroine had no intention of telling him the truth, but she was interested in what he would answer. She said she had a dream where he destroyed her immediately after she became useless to him. He smirked because he knew the girl couldn't see his expression. Kneading her head with his thin fingers, he began to speak, beginning with the words, "My dear daughter." Then, he asked her to immediately forget about this nightmare, because he would never leave her. Adding that she was his only hope, she then asked if he forgave her. Byron said that this should not happen again, and that training should not be neglected. After all, the only person who can carry out his revenge is her. Then, he gave her a painful slap and demanded that she begin eating. Changing his tone slightly, Byron added that she must eat to grow strong, and the food should be high-calorie, so that it would be easier for her to cope with her task. She looked at the plate, which again contained a healthy piece of meat, and winced. She was already sick of such food, and she did not fail to tell Byron about it. That evening, Laura, while doing her hair, muttered nasally that the owner was truly merciful. After all, he forgave her so easily today, and this shows how much he loves her. Then she added that Ayla only needs to do her best to live up to expectations. Since our heroine did not speak right away, the maid became extremely angry. She hurt the young lady, but the girl decided to endure. Otherwise, her revenge would fail. Ayla said that she was just tired, because today was her first training with weapons. The maid listened to the excuse and replied that she would let all the mistakes go unpunished today. Then she sternly added that the girl should go to bed if she didn't want to oversleep again. When our heroine was finally left alone, she took a deep breath. She thought that one day she would pay for all the pain that was caused to her. But now she had something to do that she hoped was much more important. She was going to find a secret passage, so she looked at the wall, which seemed normal. Where should she start, she thought, and then that the entrance must be well hidden. Having carefully examined the entire surface, she began to feel it, trying to find a crack. When she found it, she put her hand on it to catch the air that would penetrate. Unfortunately, she couldn't feel anything, but the gap was too wide. She even thought that perhaps it was just some kind of construction error, but she decided to check. Suddenly, there was something hidden there and moved a chair to get it. However, she was not tall enough to reach it, so she tried with all her might. But her persistence was rewarded, and with her fingertips, she felt something. She thought she heard a click, but a second later, everything changed. She realized that she had not imagined it. The mechanism had worked, and the secret door had opened. Breathing heavily, she thought it was a miracle she hadn't fallen in there along with the chair. I was glad that I found it so quickly, but I thought that I should still be careful. It was pitch dark there, but she was afraid to take a candle, so she went like this. Ayla decided not to even guess where this might lead her. She simply moved down. Meanwhile, Byron had Claude with a report. He said that he was worried about a young lady. He reported that they had their first weapons training today, and she had done a great job. He explained that he couldn't even believe that she had never held a sword in her hands before. Byron replied, "That's what it means to be Roderick's daughter. She clearly has the blood of a swordsman in her." Laughing at this thought, he added that it was funny when a daughter inherits her father's talent. Then, after thinking a bit, I decided that there was no point in dwelling on this now, and he asked Claude not to pay attention to this and let him continue to train hard. After all, the faster her skills improve, the faster she can stab her father in the back. When Byron asked if there were any more questions, the answer was negative. Then the gentleman let Claude go, because he himself already needed a normal rest. The lights went out in the office, and the voices fell silent, leaving only a slight movement outside. Stepping carefully, Our heroine entered the office and repeated the phrase about her talent. Even though she was the daughter of a swordmaster, she believed that she had no talent. She recovered so slowly that she kept persuading Byron not to increase the load. Things got better over time, but only because she tried so hard. Brushing these thoughts aside, she decided to focus on searching for clues and information. In front of her stood Byron's desk, and that was the best place to look. Ayla glanced quickly at it and realized that there were too many letters for a hermit to have. She always thought that he had no contact with the outside world while he was in hiding. Taking one in her hands, she read that Byron had thought about this proposal for a long time. I decided that I wouldn't mind hunting a young wild lion either. But how can he be frivolous towards the wolf who protects him? Byron reminded his opponent that he had taken part in an unsuccessful hunt, and there was evidence. He asked not to worry. He is raising a hunting dog, so the wolf will be dealt with soon. She realized that they were calling her the dog, which meant that the wolf was the Duke, her real father. It turned out that for them, this death was just a step to get closer to someone else. She knew from the past that the correspondence between nobles contained different codes. Families were often represented by symbolic animals, usually badgers and deer. This was done to avoid conflict in the event of an information leak. The teacher said that more powerful animals were used for more influential families. She was terribly bored in these lessons, but now she realized that this knowledge could be useful. But then she listened extremely inattentively, and now she reproached herself for it. She tried to remember who the lion symbolized, but she couldn't. Continuing on her way to her room, she suddenly heard voices and became interested. There was talk about whether they should continue to deceive the little child. By the voice, she recognized Caphalia, who asked if her uncle had really forgotten what her father had done. Then she asked if they had forgotten about the place, since her husband, his older brother, had been killed. After the death of their father, the entire Caphalia family had to flee like fugitives. Then she told Laura that she definitely didn't remember all the details of what happened. And also, if their master's plan fails, they will be branded as traitors, and that she doesn't want a life of shame to be left to her future children. Then Ayla realized that they were all one Urgus family, but she did not notice it until her death. Laura said that her father should be remembered as a knight who died with honor defending his master. And this is possible. Then she is ready to serve the daughter of the enemy of their family. Claude began to calm his niece, saying that he shouldn't have said that. Our heroine thought it was time to go back, but made a careless move. No one except Claude heard the sound, but he had excellent hearing. Laura asked what was the matter. Then he asked warily if they hadn't heard anything, and Caphalia said that it was a magical messenger bird and praised Claude. She explained that he had good skills, since he was able to hear a slight rustle. Claude thought that it was definitely not a bird, and that the sound had not seemed to him. He peered into the darkness outside the window and thought about what he had heard. There is no one to eavesdrop in this mansion, and only flightless birds live here. Our heroine tossed and turned in bed all night. Sleep just wouldn't come to her, and for good reason. At first, Isla pondered what she had found in Byron's office, then about what she heard. Because Urgi's family accused her father of the death of their relative. She couldn't get her head around the idea that her father, such a noble man, would kill someone. But if this is all true, then it turns out that Byron's revenge is truly justified. She was distracted from her thoughts by shouts that something like this had never happened before. The maid looked in, and seeing that the lady was awake, said that the master was not in a good mood today. Then she added that Ayla would eat alone, and then the girl asked if something had happened. In response, Laura said that maybe the young lady had done something wrong, and they didn't know. Fearing that Byron might find out that she had been in his office, she became quiet. Meanwhile, the maid was complaining about the mess in the room and demanded that it be cleaned. After answering that it was not her job, Ayla thought that something else had probably happened. But what? Nothing came to her mind, and she was so lost in thought that Laura was already shouting at her. As I ran to practice, I realized that I had let my guard down and let my thoughts take over. She wouldn't be able to find out anything from Laura anyway, so she decided to ask Claude. Claude read a letter about an event that happened 10 days ago. It said that she had fainted and was still unconscious. Byron shouted that his Ophelia was never sick and was always healthy. He shouted why he hadn't been informed earlier, then demanded that the crew be prepared immediately. That's why he must see her, no matter how Roderick reacts to it. He added that even if it cost him his hand, and then suddenly thought about it, Byron looked at Claude and said that it was not worth falling into the clutches of this bastard. Instead, it would be better to reconsider your plan, because Ophelia is looking forward to it. Looking at the map, Byron sang that the hunt would begin with the next step. Claude warned that they had not yet received consent or entered into a partnership, but the owner persisted, because this was another reason to act and pull others up. That in the worst case, it is just a grown lion cub, and it would be more difficult to kill one of them, and they need to show what power they have. Then Claude tried to dissuade them. Byron was angered by the chivalry of his confidant, which prevented him from killing the child. And then he asked Claude if maybe it was the girl Isla that was bothering his conscience. He also said that she had such beautiful hair, like Ophelia's, and if he wants something, he must achieve it by any possible means. And if Claude doubts, some other fool will take her place next to her. And it wasn't only our heroine who noticed that a strong wind had risen. The servant warned his master about this and asked him to return to the carriage. But the young lion cub was full of strength, and life seemed serene and happy to him. And Claude heard the phrase that a sinner must use the methods of a sinner. On another estate, a father was seeing his beloved son off on a month-long journey. He was so worried that he asked the servants several times if all the luggage was packed. The son persuaded his father not to worry. Time would fly by, and he would be back soon. He added that he was worried about Mr. Vashhaven, since he had not been able to visit them. But his father reassured him, saying that today they reported that the lady had regained consciousness, and it was not safe to visit them, because it was unknown what kind of disease they had. He added that they had sent the Duke a gift that would be greatly appreciated. Then the father wished his son a good journey and a speedy return. The carriage drove away, and the butler reported, saying that the Duchess had not yet fully recovered. Then he ordered to send the best doctor to the Duke. This situation affects the entire empire. The father did not want to tell the whole truth to his son before leaving. He already had important business. He wanted the child to be focused on hope now, not reality. Our heroine was ready to burst into tears, because the matter had not moved from dead center. She didn't expect Claude to be so resilient. She wanted to see his reaction. I was late on purpose, but he didn't even bat an eyelid. He just made the training more difficult. And then he added that she was starting classes on poisons. Such was the master's order. Ayla didn't understand why this life was different. She started learning poisons later. Now she had no confidence. She didn't know what would happen to her in the future. She suggested that perhaps the changes were due to her being reborn. In such moments of loneliness, she wished that someone could comfort her. And even though she accepted herself in the situation, she still felt awkward. After she had experienced that tragedy, she now felt even that warmth more vividly. She was bored and wanted to go back to that distant future as soon as possible. The city of Primus in the Western Mountains was named after the emperor who founded the empire. Primus Arphibart Pellus left behind words that he would become a guardian deity, after which he disappeared behind the dangerous mountains, and none of his descendants were able to find him. Soon a tradition arose in the imperial family. The heir must visit this city. He must meet the guardian deity and perform a ritual to gain permission. For this purpose, a grand temple, shrouded in sacred myth, was erected in Primus. People in the city were focused on maintaining this ancient tradition. Our heroine remembered this historical information from her lessons, but this did not help her now to understand for what purpose Byron went there. It's been 3 days since she fainted, and today she snuck into the office again. She thought it might have something to do with the lion hunt, but there were no leads. To her chagrin, Byron apparently burned all his correspondence before leaving. However, this journey seemed familiar to her, and she decided to return here again. Sometimes Byron took her with him on trips, but mostly it was just moving. Usually she was hidden in rags, but one day she was given a potion to drink for better camouflage. That time she didn't know why, but she was simply left alone in the hotel without explanation. She hoped that if he took her next time, she would try to slip away from Laura. Suddenly, she heard Byron calling Claude loudly and was surprised. Then the thought occurred to her that the owner of the house's bedroom was probably nearby. Byron asked his confidant to urgently bring him Isla to look at her hair. He explained that Ophelia's face would not leave his mind, and that was why he could not sleep. Realizing that things were bad and she could be caught, she rushed to her room. Laura was fast asleep. She could not even imagine what might be needed at such a time. When she heard a knock, she thought she had misheard, but she sat up. Claude told her that he had come to pick up the night key for the owner. Our heroine, meanwhile, quickly made the journey back and arrived on time. As she settled into bed, she thought about how best to behave in this situation. After all, they never came to check on her at such a late hour. Voices were heard outside the door. Byron said that he could rest later. She thought about what to do. Pretend to be asleep or pretend to be awake. How she would have done it before. When she considered Byron her loving father, the footsteps outside the door were getting closer, and now he was already saying the name Ophelia behind her back. Afraid to even move, Ayla continued to wonder what would happen next. Having no idea what to do, she decided to pretend to be asleep. In the end, our heroine didn't know why he really came. But when I felt the touch of his hand, I thought it was time to wake up. It was difficult for her to make a sleepy face, so she covered herself with a blanket. Trying to be more kind, she asked when he arrived. Did he really want to see her? Byron, looking at the girl in surprise, asked Claude why he had come. No less surprised, he replied that the gentleman himself had ordered the young lady to be brought. The owner said with disappointment that it was this child again, but she was not Ophelia. Still keeping an innocent face, Ayla wanted only one thing, for him to go away. The girl's face brought Byron to his senses. He said that he woke her up for no reason, so he wished her a good night's sleep. He couldn't even imagine what she was going through right now. She was very worried that she couldn't wish him good night right away. But having gathered her strength, she uttered this simple phrase without stuttering. When he left, she thought with horror that he had seen through her pretense. Once again, having illuminated the room with a lamp, everyone left, leaving her finally alone. As Claude said, the next day the poison lessons began. After he explained everything to her, she had to try it herself. But by asking what she was thinking about, he stopped her actions. He explained that it was poison, and that he should concentrate so as not to be exposed to danger. She apologized, thinking that she was having trouble concentrating after the night. She kept wondering if she had been caught, but Claude didn't look worried. Looking at her, he asked that yesterday she only pretended that everything was okay. She remained silent, and he continued that the gentleman had been too drunk yesterday to remember. Claude sympathetically warned that next time it would be better to be more careful. After all, if the gentleman remembers, he will treat what happened frivolously. She was interested in his tone when he said that it didn't matter how upset she was. In her mind, she replied that that was not the right word to describe the situation. He pointed out that she trains a lot, and it is clear why she looks depressed. Again, Ayla mentally asked herself if he thought this was a teenage tantrum. Having thanked him out loud for these words, she decided to try to find out something. She asked if something had been going on with her father lately, and if she was the cause. When he replied that it was not her, Ayla asked about Ophelia, a name she had heard yesterday. She knew for sure that Byron had said her mother's name, so it was time to ask. Our heroine waited impatiently for a useful answer. Claude replied that yes. Then he added that it was all because of Ophelia, and the girl herself was here for this reason. Suddenly changing the subject, he asked her to open her mouth for a minute, which surprised her. Having asked why and not receiving an answer, she nevertheless fulfilled this strange request. Our heroine expected different things, but she could not predict what happened. Claude carefully placed the candy in her mouth with his fingers. It was delicious. Biting into it, Ayla felt the pleasant taste of strawberry jam on her tongue. After that, he smiled and conspiratorially asked to keep it a secret. He said that the lesson was over and that they would set off on their journey tomorrow. Therefore, I advised her to save her strength, finish the candy, and go upstairs. She asked him a question that had been bothering him for some time. He felt sorry for her. Without turning around, Claude replied that the gentleman had asked about that too, and he thought about the answer for a long time. But now he can say that it is not so. She was curious what he meant and how he really felt. The day of departure arrived, and our heroine was glad that Byron had taken her with him. Her high spirits were dampened by the fact that she was given a masking potion again. She didn't want to accept it, but she understood that she had no choice anyway. Laura explained that the effect only lasts for one day, so take it every morning. And also, don't show yourself on the street once the potion wears off. Isla was fully prepared. Lucky for her that day that Claude left first. If he hadn't done this, she wouldn't have had time to prepare the sleeping pill. So she will be able to slip past Laura. But will she be able to interfere with his plans? She didn't see a detailed and written plan, but she was able to make some guesses. Byron does not have many henchmen, not counting servants, only 30 people. Sometimes he paid for mercenaries, but this time he was accompanied by Claude and a guard. So if something goes wrong, it will most likely not be the security guard who takes action. Our heroine could bet that Claude was the strongest in this group, but if she follows him, she will definitely discover something. At some point, she became interested in Claude's reaction. He seemed to be enjoying it. She thought sadly that in her past life, she had not had the chance to see the world. When they arrived at a high fence, she decided to look outside. However, this was not what shocked her. She would never have thought that it could be so beautiful. Ayla didn't have time to enjoy the view from the window before the guards ordered them to stop. The security said that they had to check their documents and search them first. Claude introduced Count and Countess Monday, as well as their 2 assistants. He said that the purpose of the visit was tourism, and that they would stay here for no more than a week. The second guard approached the carriage, and it seemed to him that he had already seen the Count. But to his question, Byron replied that he was here for the first time, and his face was simple. The guard said it was my imagination and asked me to open the trunk. They didn't find anything suspicious, but she noted the strict checks. She wondered if the city had always been like this, but she didn't ask. The guard told another that he could not remember where he had seen the traveler's face before. The second joked that he could use a brochure with criminals, but then the garrison would be waiting for him. A full moon rose over the city, and each hero had his own plan of action. Taking advantage of the darkness, Claude carefully slipped out of the hotel doors. He thought, Laura is watching the young lady closely, and Ayla is next to the master, so there shouldn't be any problems, but he had no idea about the state of affairs. Claude wanted to finish the task quickly and return, but Ayla's plan was already in effect. Laura didn't stand a chance when it came to poisons. The young lady was a diligent student. Climbing up onto the roof to get a better view, she got rid of unnecessary evidence. From above, she could clearly see where Claude was rushing to, and she mentally hurried him. So far, her plan was working, and she gave herself a few moments to enjoy it. Claude will become a pawn, and with his help, she will destroy Byron's petty ambitions. Hiding in the darkness, he ran through the deserted streets towards his goal. She was in good shape, so it was not difficult for her to follow right behind him. She was curious about where Claude was heading, and was upset that she didn't know the city. But this did not stop her from following him relentlessly. But suddenly she stopped. Ahead, in a small alley, she saw a bright, almost blinding light. Having moved a little closer, she decided that she absolutely had to take a closer look. When I saw the child, I thought that he appeared out of nowhere, probably teleportation magic. But then he has high-level magic, which means he comes from a wealthy family. Claude was downstairs, and then the thought occurred to her that this young man could be the target. Ayla remembered that the lion was called young, and tried to determine its age. The boy was rather young than youthful, and now he was clearly about to go somewhere. Our heroine continued her observation, and the youth continued on his way. All these facts led her to the idea that this was an unusual case, and it was time to intervene. Once again, happy that she had trained well, she jumped off the roof. She was falling straight down on the boy, and he, hearing the whistle, raised his head. One could read genuine surprise in his eyes. And it was understandable. It's not every day that girls fall from the sky on you. He saw her flowing hair and her amazingly deep blue eyes. The youth was so amazed by this phenomenon that he could not take a step. A moment later, Claude appeared in the alley, but the children were nowhere to be found. He stopped in the middle, confused, trying to understand what was happening. Cursing, he quietly asked himself where these children could have gone. And since there was simply no one to answer him, he quickly ran to look. Meanwhile, the young lion cub cursed, trying to break free from the death grip. Our heroine, holding him tightly and covering his mouth with her palm, asked him to be quieter. He continued to resist, and then she whispered that the hunter was nearby. Ayla had no intention of harming him, but he resisted strongly. She asked him to be quiet, but he, not reacting to her words, bit her finger. Breaking free, he asked who she was and why she had fallen from the sky on him so suddenly. He even suggested that she might be an angel, but she didn't answer. Meanwhile, the disappearance of this little hero had already alarmed his guards. They scurried through the streets, the commander giving orders to find him. The city guards joined them, and they were going to attract the citizens. The captain gave orders to track down every suspicious person and then arrest them. Someone discovered traces of teleportation and reported it to the captain. They checked them. Our heroes settled down on the roof. Things were getting serious. She told him that she would take him back, but she couldn't let anyone see her. The young man replied that everything was fine. He came himself, so it was his responsibility. Then he added that what was more important was that she was hurt somewhere and her clothes were dirty. After examining myself, I thought that I probably got dirty while moving downwards. She couldn't go back like that. The boy understood her fears, so he asked her to stand still, and then took a scroll out from his bosom. He said it was a magic scroll for cleansing. You have to tear it up and say a spell. Her new acquaintance did not deceive her. After a few seconds, her clothes were clean. He was very pleased with himself, but she was uncomfortable because the spell was very expensive. The youth, not listening to her lamentations, spread out his cloak and invited her to sit down. Then he said proudly that caring for the lady is a trait of a true gentleman, and that he hopes that she will gratefully accept his kindness and sit down. And since there was still time before returning, he would be happy to chat a little. Sitting down, she said, "He really knows a lot for his age." The boy replied that although she looked young, she spoke like an adult. Finding out that he was 2 years older than her, he noted that she was small but strong. Then he added that she was incredible, and after a short pause, that she was also beautiful. It was easy for her to talk to him, although she hadn't communicated so naturally with anyone for a long time. She thanked him for the clothes and everything else, but he was very surprised. In response, he told her that he should be thanking her because she was his savior. Asking her to smile, he said that she, too, needed to learn to accept gratitude. He looked at her so intently that she became embarrassed and even blushed. Then he apologized for sitting so close, but she knew that wasn't the point. Ayla couldn't explain what she felt, but it was something exciting. She compared him to something shining, and at that moment, something flashed before her eyes. This brooch in his hand, he asked if she would accept it as a gift, as his savior. He explained that this brooch was magical and would look very good on her. Seeing her uncertainty, he asked her not to refuse, but simply to accept. He suddenly realized that they still hadn't met, so he introduced himself. When he told her his name, she was stunned, because his name was Winfried Pelle. This could only mean one thing. A representative of the imperial family was sitting in front of her. The crown prince of the empire looked at her now with his honey-colored eyes. Her consciousness immediately presented her with an image of the imperial family's coat of arms. The puzzle instantly came together in her head, and many things became obvious to her. She became scared. She was sitting on the roof with a young lion cub, and he was being hunted. Claude looked around the deserted street, continuing his unsuccessful search. He scolded himself for missing the target, but now he didn't know where else to look. And he didn't feel anyone nearby using spatial magic. The security guards also checked all the streets. They passed very close to Claude. They were also worried about where the crown prince could have gone. They had already walked everywhere, but still had not found any trace of the young master. Claude managed to jump back at the last moment, before the guards passed. But it wasn't that simple. Alexia Dexon was always on the alert. The area was under special protection, so she asked what he was doing there. Holding him back, she demanded that he show her his documents and state his name. However, Claude knew that contact with this lady was extremely undesirable for him at this time. Having pulled himself together for a sharp lunge, he drew up his sword and made his move. He hoped that he would be able to knock the sword out of her hands, but he failed to do so. Alexia was a very experienced swordsman and recognized his next attack. Having knocked away his sword, she pounced on Claude, but he instantly parried the blow. It was a beautiful fight, and someone might even have applauded watching it. But there were no witnesses, only these two, who fought to the death. She already knew who her opponent was, so she wasn't going to back down. And she couldn't let this person go, so she said that she hadn't seen him for a long time. Alexia said that since then, his swordplay had become more treacherous. The knight asked what brought Claude Ergas, the shadow of a traitor, to this city. Our young heroes continued their conversation, forgetting about what was happening below, but she was more frightened by who her new acquaintance was. It changed a lot. Realizing he needed to reassure her, he apologized for not telling her who he was. He asked not to worry, because he is not even an heir yet, but simply Winfried. He asked not to address him formally, so as not to distance themselves from each other, but she was still worried, because she remembered that the imperial symbol was a lion. It was said that the current emperor was a close friend of her father and the same age. Then it turned out that the young wild lion was the current emperor, and he was the target. But why would Byron go so far as to stage a coup d'etat? At first, her thoughts were confused, but gradually she began to understand a lot. Byron's words about Ophelia, about his hand, and of course, about the lost place surfaced. She decided to ask Unfred an important question. He agreed and asked to call him Vin. I asked if there had been any incident related to the throne. He was surprised. Ayla explained that for some reason, she has gaps in her education, but she knows that some unpredictable event has occurred in the imperial family. Now he is afraid that because of this ignorance, he might say something stupid. The heir considered this to be sensitive and replied that the incident was not over yet. Thinking that it was hard not to know, she heard about the first prince's rebellion. The previous emperor named his second son, not his first, as his successor. Winifred did not know the exact reasons, but his father ascended to the throne, breaking tradition. And his uncle, Byron Lionel Vito Pellis, was furious about it. But he is a man with the gift of persuasion, and with words alone, he united several noble houses. He led them into rebellion while Winifred's father was traveling to Primus. Only grandfather and the imperial guards remained in the palace, and things went badly. Then the empire's swordmaster, Roderick Allen Vashaven, and his knights appeared. The uprising was suppressed, and the traitors who were captured were stripped of their titles and executed. And those who managed to escape were put on the wanted list, including our hero's uncle. The prince asked her to be attentive, and she thought about the color of his eyes, like Byron's. Ayla asked if Vin was close to his uncle, and he said no. He was 4 years old at the time. Then he added cheerfully that he had never even met Byron in person. He said that everything he had just told about were topics that he had been taught. The heir, feeling sad, said that his grandfather had died 3 years ago, and the father didn't want him to know the truth, but it seems that the grandfather had other plans. The emperor insisted that Winifred became the heir, although his father believed it was too early. Grandfather said that wisdom comes with position, but uncle is still free. He can come back at any moment and attack, so Vin needs to study hard. To be near his father, this was the emperor's last request. Then Vin promised that he would become a worthy crown prince and protect his father. The prince said that he was still young, but now that he had finished his title, he wanted to grow up faster, and that he has a dream to help his father capture his uncle and bring peace to the empire. Then he apologized for chatting so much, but he simply had no one to talk to about it. She looked at him and wondered if it was because of her that this kind-hearted boy had died. And just as she killed her father in the future, Byron's rebellion succeeded and the empire fell. Until that day, she had dreamed only of revenge, but now she was glad that she had such a destiny. Ayla said she would take him back before it was too late. He reminded her that she didn't want to be seen, and the commotion downstairs hadn't died down yet. Having said that she would look into it, she thought that she needed to conduct a thorough investigation. Handing over the brooch, she explained that she was returning it because she didn't deserve it. The prince shouted that he asked her not to tell him such things anymore. She was his savior. That is why he deserves gratitude, and why he continues to reject his gift. But she felt very uncomfortable accepting anything from him, even in gratitude. However, this way of putting the question did not suit him, and he was not going to leave it like that. He was so deep in thought that our heroine even began to worry about him. Breaking the silence, Vin said that it was a magic box and was not usually visible. But if you call on her, she appears, and he will give her what she left as a sign of gratitude. Cutting off her attempt to refuse, he said that it wouldn't have come to this if she had accepted. And if she rejects this gift, he will give her something even more grandiose. Then, he added, that we need to look at what magical instruments we have with us. And this brooch is also magical. Over time it changes color, like a watch. The box leaves no magical trace and was created by the most powerful magician in the world. She even has a protective spell cast on her, so you won't get into trouble with her. The prince asked her to state her name, adding that he had already asked, but she waved it off. He needs to know it in order to transfer ownership of the magical instruments. When she asked whether it was necessary to have a full name, he replied that it was not necessary as long as it was real. When she said Ayla Heiling, he thought he had heard it somewhere before. The heir stated his full name, then that he hereby transfers the right of ownership. And then he looked at these magical instruments and said her name. Vin asked if she wanted to try summoning, which required whistling. Our heroine guessed that now she definitely couldn't refuse. But there was one thing. She confessed to her young friend that she couldn't whistle, and then he thought about it. But a moment later, his mood changed, and she was distracted from their conversation. Below, the duel between Claude and Alexia continued. They came together and separated. From time to time they stopped, and then the ringing blows of swords could be heard again. The guard began to get tired of this fight and demanded that Claude stop. She called him an idiot and said she wouldn't deny he was an excellent knight, that it even seems to her that he has become a step above his brother Bayfold. Having cornered him, she asked him if he was sure he could defeat all these people. Several guards actually came to her aid, and she offered him to surrender. Alexia said that in this case the law will judge him fairly. Claude understood the hopelessness of the situation, but he could not give up under any circumstances. He knew he had a backup plan, and the time had come to use it. But to do this, he needed to distract the knights, which he did with his quick lunge. Ignoring his bleeding wounds, he stepped into the magic circle. A bright bolt of lightning shot into the night sky, illuminating the entire holy city with its light. For a few moments, the knights were blinded. They were too close to the epicenter. Alexia angrily stated that this coward Claude had a magic scroll. Our young heroes simply couldn't help but see this flash of bright light in the distance. Winifred said that this is how the magic scroll signals, which means that something serious has happened. Figuring that this was a pursuit of Claude, she suggested that the heir take advantage of the confusion. Already from below, she asked the prince not to walk at night. This mercenary would hunt him. Before jumping to, Winifred asked her what she knew about it. She couldn't tell him the whole truth and how she got involved with it. She only said that it was a big secret, but she knew that the mercenary was sent by Uncle Byron. Then he bombarded her with questions about where she got such information and who she really was. I repeated to him that it was a secret, and she continued to run, trying to avoid the guards. Hiding in an alley, she said she thought he would find out who she was very soon. Therefore, she has a request for him to convey a message to her real parents. And even though she can't meet them yet, she remembers and asks them to wait a little. When the danger of the guards had passed, Ayla dragged him on. Finally, they reached the temple gates, and she asked them to tell her father that she would return soon. Looking at her carefully, the prince asked if she would reveal her real name to him, but the moment for truth had not yet arrived. So the girl smiled at Vin as she said goodbye. Her last sentence was that she was counting on him because he was a true gentleman. A second later, only our young hero remained on the street, trying to stop her. With bitterness in his voice, he asked if they would see each other again, but there was no answer. The next morning arrived at its usual hour, but Laura almost missed it. However, the cries that it was high time for her to go down woke her up. Her head was splitting mercilessly. She thought that after dinner, she felt sleepy, but not so tired that she collapsed. Laura guessed what awaited her if they found out that she had not been keeping an eye on the young lady. To avoid being caught, she loudly replied that she was already on her way down and quickly disappeared. Our heroine thought it was good that Laura was not very smart and had not guessed anything, and she didn't notice how she was pumped full of drugs, and there was noise downstairs, so she would soon forget about everything. Ayla knew that Laura would be busy for a while, so she could rest. While she was unattended, she decided that she could check the gifts from the prince. Snapping her fingers, our heroine prepared to take the box, and it appeared. Since our heroine couldn't whistle, the heir changed the call, and it worked. He said this should have been done before transferring ownership. He asked to give him his hand because he needed to use her mana for the spell. When she asked him if he could use magic, he replied that the magician had taught him. She then thought that this was truly an incredible magician, and she was curious who he was. When Winifred touched her hand and started using magic, a soft light appeared. But it wasn't just the light that was incredible. The way she felt was amazing too. Strangely, she felt as if that light from the past was still with her. Ayla was afraid to move. She didn't want to lose this extraordinary connection. She was roused from this pleasant stupor by Laura's cries that Uncle Claude had not returned. I heard that it seems there was a clash with the guards at night, and security has been increased. Laura was asked not to make a fuss, and was ordered to send a letter canceling the visit. Ophelia said that the budget needs to be revised, so she will check the jewelry. Our heroine understood that they were planning to go to the temple. But how? Given Byron's personality, maybe he wanted to kill Winfred and then hold the ceremony of initiation into the crown prince. It became quite obvious to her what kind of picture Byron was going to paint. The only thing that consoled her now was that the assassination attempt had apparently failed. However, her interference led to Claude's disappearance, and this may be the problem. She didn't know how things would develop if he never returned, but she could have guessed that future events would be distorted and her actions limited. Thinking about all this, she realized that no matter what, she did not regret it. Thanks to a chance meeting with Winfred, she was able to obtain something valuable. No matter what the future holds, she will have the courage to overcome it. Alexia, kneeling before the crown prince, reported her misdeed. This was the first time something like this had happened to her, so his words that it was a mistake did not convince her. She said that such a weak escort allowed the killer to escape, and that Prince Winfred must definitely hold the escort squad accountable. He replied that he had already written a report to the emperor, but for now he needed to focus on catching the criminal. Then he asked about what they said, that there were no witnesses in Primus. Alexia replied that she noticed a wound near his eye, but they had not consulted any doctors. The guards were questioned and reported that no one had attempted to escape from the city. The knight said that the criminal was clearly not someone to be taken lightly, and it was her mistake that she did not foresee the use of the scroll, because it was an expensive thing. Winifred wondered how his uncle could afford this, since illegal scrolls were even more expensive. Thinking about what was happening, I asked her opinion, maybe expand the boundaries of the search. To which Alexia replied that it was difficult, because there were many roads leading out of Primus, and most of them are in rural areas, where unfortunately, there is no imperial guard. The prince decided that it would be better for him to return to the capital and wait for his uncle's next move. Alexei thought that the heir was maintaining a calmness that was unusual for his age. Vin asked to reduce the amount of luggage so that the crew would be more mobile. He also asked to take simple food so as not to waste time on its preparation. At the end, our hero asked if he could take some books with him. He did not explain why, but he urgently needed to study the registers of nobles. He had her name, and he clearly remembered that he had heard this last name somewhere before. This meant that she was from the nobility, and he decided that he would begin his search with the local nobility. If she were the daughter of some politician, he would not have forgotten. He could see the expression on her face when she made her last request to him. To avoid feeling awkward the next time they met, he decided to study everything. At the main gate, all carts were stopped and subjected to a thorough inspection. People were outraged because they were even forced to take off their clothes for inspection. The guards asked for cooperation, because in that case, everything would go faster. But the travelers had no choice, because this was an order from the Imperial Guard. Alexia informed the squad that the heir was leaving the city, but this information was confidential. And also, their mission is to catch all the remaining traitors who are still hiding, that it is still necessary to distribute wanted posters for key figures. Therefore, she asked the squad to familiarize themselves and not to be negligent during the inspection. Claude was recognized in an advert, and Alexia said they would deal with it later, but she already knew that she had missed one of the very dangerous criminals yesterday. The guards were told that even if they were on the border, they remained the swords of the Empire. They stopped another crew and asked everyone to get out and unload the luggage. The coachman tried to say that they're lady, but the guard interrupted and replied that everyone without exception. To his phrase that, regardless of status, Caphalia asked what the guards were allowing themselves to do. She was so convincing that the guard was at a loss and asked for cooperation. Caphalia continued that it was simply outrageous to be so rude to women. Byron heard the assistant demanding a name so she could file a formal complaint. Hiding from the guards, he held our heroine back so that she would not try to give them away. But she didn't intend to. She just needed to survive this day so that everything would return to how it was. She already knew that Claude had sent a letter saying that he had fled to the mountains. He also wrote that he was being treated by a village doctor and would then immediately return to their shelter. Isla found it strange that Byron, upon receiving this letter, was immediately getting ready to go back. She thought he would get even angrier, and she couldn't believe he was worried about Claude. But if he is an important resource, then she should try to make him an ally. She thought that Claude had always had some kind of sympathy or other feelings for her. She felt very uncomfortable sitting, thinking too, but Claude needed to be used. Suddenly, her thoughts jumped and she remembered the heir and his face when they parted. Byron pulled her head down again, and Isla began to think about that insufferable bastard again. He hadn't left his hideout for the past few years, and she hadn't understood the reasons before. But now I could guess that this sortie had great significance for Byron. He had no choice but to lie low, so that he could not be tracked down. And with this leash around her neck, Isla will have to behave well and follow Byron. She really hoped that she would be able to meet Unfred in the distant future. She wondered if he would remember her, if he would keep her in his thoughts. Our heroine couldn't even imagine what the prince was thinking about her right now. The arrival of the crown prince, who was already awaited by his father, was announced at the palace. Vin jumped out of the carriage and ran headlong towards him, because he also missed him. The father, embracing him, asked if the heir knew how shocked he was when he received the letter. When he asked how Vin had figured out how to walk without an escort, he replied that he had been helped. The prince said he did not write about the savior because she wished to remain anonymous. The emperor became interested in who she was, but his son replied that he was still searching. He knew his son had a good heart, but he was suspicious that the savior didn't ask for anything. This behavior is more consistent with a criminal, so what could she be hiding? But when he saw the downloaded registers, he guessed that his son was trying to find her on his own. Moreover, Winfred said that if the father finds out the name first, it will not be a secret. However, he gave the order to immediately return to Primus and find out all the circumstances. He didn't voice his order to Winfred, because he himself taught him to respond to kindness. The emperor was very upset about what happened, but tried not to show it. The heir asked if there was any news from the master's residence recently, but unfortunately, my father didn't have good news, so he changed the subject. Without answering, he asked the prince not to forget to visit him in the near future. The Duke of Vashaven's estate was in a depressing state, although the mistress had come to her senses. The best doctors continued to visit her, but their knowledge was limited, and they were never able to determine the cause of her illness, which they reported to the Duke. The Duke thanked the doctors for their work and advised them to have a good rest. The doctors were very upset that they could not help this noble man, but he told them that he did not blame them, and added that he would go and visit his wife. Sir Roderick had been restless for the last few days, because she was not getting better. That day, Ophelia looked much better, but the pallor of her face was striking, and although he knew the verdict of the doctors, he was still interested in what she would say. Closing her eyes, she replied that everything was fine, but she already had a premonition. Then she asked that apparently nothing could be fixed. Then she started talking about her daughter. She explained that instead of grieving, they should do everything in their power. He didn't want to start with this right away, but since she brought it up, he said there was news. She looked up at her husband in surprise, and then he said that he had received a letter. It was a letter from His Majesty, in which he reported the latest news. As we already know, the young prince encountered a mercenary sent by Byron. Sir Roderick informed his wife that the prince, who had been stripped of his title, had begun to act. As you know, once a rat is driven into a hole, it will look for a way to get out. Many years ago, Duke Vashaven broke into the captured imperial palace. He knew that a traitor was waiting for him there, who called him an old friend. Byron then asked whether the Duke had come running as soon as he sensed danger. The traitor was intoxicated by his impunity and thought that it would continue this way. To his cheerful greeting, Sir Roderick begged to be spared these courtesies, because he is a traitor and has been stripped of his title of heir, and he has no right to greet him. Byron held a grudge from the first day he learned that his father had chosen his younger brother. He reprimanded Duke Vashaven for the verdicts being made behind his back, that every day is the same, and how did it happen that the eldest son is trash? He started shouting and said that it was beyond comprehension, and the echo echoed in the empty hall. After all, he is the eldest son in the imperial family, and he is destined to reign at the top. Sir Roderick smiled and said that it was because ambition exceeded merit. Byron said that it was the Duke who came up with the proposal to make the second son the heir. The Duke did not bat an eyelid when he replied that he had never said such a thing to the Emperor, and then he asked to stop. But if he continued, he would be executed on the spot. However, it was Duke Roderick that Byron blamed for all his troubles and misfortunes, even in the fact that the place of his exile was the Vashaven estate, and Ophelia did not choose it. Looking back, Byron remembered that his father had always trusted the Duke as a son. I remembered his words about how the Emperor always insisted that they look after his son. He told the Duke that it was now clear to him that his eldest son was completely hopeless. He also remembered how his father asked Sir Roderick to kill him if necessary, but to stop him. Continuing to throw his grievances, he did not think that help might appear. He relied so much on the nobility of the swordmaster that he made an unforgivable mistake. When the knights from the Duke's squad had dealt with the other traitors, they came to the rescue. Realizing that he would not be able to withstand the unequal battle, he used magic. But first, he said he would wipe that smug expression off his shameless face. Byron swung his bloody sword and promised to ruin his life. No one expected this, but immediately after that day, the Duke of Isla's daughter went missing. The circumstances clearly indicated that Byron was the one who kidnapped her, but there was no evidence. Sir Roderick said it seemed he was now involved in an attempt to assassinate the heir. Luckily, Winfred was not hurt, and this is an opportunity that may never come again. The Duke said he planned to begin searching as soon as she felt better. Ophelia replied that they had to go now. Her body was a little weaker, but it didn't matter. She explained that they couldn't waste a minute now that the key to the solution had appeared. He agreed with his wife, because they had a chance to get their missing daughter back. 3 years passed. Our heroine had grown up and was still training hard. She had excellent physical fitness and also had a natural resistance to poisons. Ayla was an excellent swordsman, perhaps due to the genius blood running through her. It wasn't that she wasn't used to the look on Claude's face, but it scared her. He looked and thought that her character seemed to have changed too. That's how children grow up. Claude started to say something about the next training session, but a slight breeze distracted him. Our heroine also saw a magical messenger bird approaching them. Then she wondered if Claude was up to something, and if the future had changed again. She could only guess who the message was from, but he knew for sure. He told her that he had nothing to teach her now, and so she had free time. This was very unlike him, which meant they were reporting something out of the ordinary. Unexpectedly, he told her that she was free to do as she pleased. He suggested that she go for a walk, or maybe take a nap, do whatever she wanted. This behavior further confirmed her in the idea that the message was of special importance. Realizing that he was sending her away, our heroine did not linger near him. Since she has free time, she will think about how she tried to get closer to him. Sometimes she was even more affectionate with him, and lately he became closer to her. Ayla understood that the future had changed and was continuing to change. But what would it lead to? She hoped so, but she was still afraid, and she loudly asked Vin to help her. Very far from this place, in the Imperial Palace, our young hero wrote a letter. But although her call was not heard by him, his heart sank at that moment. This distracted him for a second, but literally a moment later, he returned to his task. The prince also matured over the years and became a handsome young man with honey-colored eyes. He heard his name and turned around, even though he already knew it was his father who had come. He had a free minute and wanted to invite his son to have some tea with him. Winifred greeted his father, who noted that his son was somewhat cold towards him. He said that lately he has been communicating with his old man a lot and is busy writing again. He added that he was sending these magical messenger birds to an unknown recipient. The prince decided to remain silent. If his father found out that he was writing to his savior, he would intervene. He changed the subject, saying that His Majesty was already busy and therefore did not dare to waste his time. The emperor was taken aback by this answer, but he was curious about what his son was hiding. So he replied that if Vin said he missed her, he would come running right away. And he asked him not to hold back, so his son replied that he was simply growing up. Then the father said that he was still young, but he would not miss his first love. The prince thoughtfully repeated about his first love, and puzzled his father with such a reaction. The emperor, as a caring father, wanted to stir up the child and find out everything. He asked the question, because he had turned to the court physician with complaints of pain in the heart. Winifred replied that he was in good health, although he had lost his appetite. Then the father happily stated that the answer was obvious. It was definitely love. And what kind of young lady is this who was able to make his boy fall in love with her? Then, with a tremor in his voice, he added that he hoped that it was still a lady and not a young man. And although Winifred answered no, his father thought that he would support the young man in any case. Vin asked, "Shouldn't love make your heart beat and your knees shake?" His Majesty saw his son's mood and said that there are many kinds of love. And the heir replied that as for him, he simply cannot forget her and thinks about her, that he is a little worried, but does not lose hope that she is doing well. Her image on the day they met came back to him in his mind. It was only natural that he thought about her. 3 years had already passed, and he still couldn't find her name. and he was very upset that he was never able to fulfill her last request. Then, pushing his father out of the room, he said that it was time for him to go. He had a lot of state affairs. The emperor jokingly replied that if he was driven away like that, he would sulk. Handing the scroll to his son, he explained that first he needed to find the gifts written there. After all, 3 years ago, the Vashaven family went on a trip, and they were never able to meet. The prince guessed that these gifts were intended for the swordmaster's family, and was delighted. The emperor asked his son not to be surprised, because the duke was returning with a new heir. Our heroine really didn't want to go back, but she pulled herself together and did it. She didn't know what exactly had caused such a commotion, and why Claude was not himself. I thought that tonight I would definitely have to get there and find out everything. For the past 3 years, she has been constantly sneaking into Byron's room. I looked through all his letters, and copying them, discovered one ward. It was the foreign Count Senesfon of Inselkopf. He was the source of Byron's funds. It was hard for her to imagine what secrets were behind such cooperation. Even without knowing all the details, I couldn't ignore it and copied as much as I could. And if it weren't for Winifred's gift, she would hardly have been able to hide all this information. Saving the prince was a butterfly effect, and she needed to be wary of changes in the future. She tried to understand if there was anyone else besides her who was changing this future. There was also a possibility that another returnee like her would appear. She was pulled out of her thoughts by Laura, who relayed Claude's order to return to his room. He also said that the owner was in a terrible mood, so one should be careful. Laura added that Claude does so much for the lady, and she should be grateful. Isla thought that Byron would remain in this state for some time. She implied that Claude must have gone out of his way to deliver that message. Byron himself, meanwhile, was furious, running around the room and shouting Ophelia. His loyal henchman tried not to give in to emotions. He knew what had happened. The owner was yelling that she was carrying a child again, and again from another man. Stopping for literally a second, he continued, "Why not him? Because he loves her." He didn't pay attention to the fact that he had created a terrible mess around himself. He was only interested in revenge, and now he was hatching a new plan for carrying out his revenge. Byron wondered if maybe he really should just kill them, and he answered himself that he had no choice. But even so, he still loved Ophelia. Moreover, his weapon of vengeance is already sufficiently prepared and ready to carry out everything. As soon as she enters the Vashaven estate, he will immediately order the newborn to be killed. He reveled in the anticipation of the Duke losing his second child at the hands of his own daughter. Our heroine has made this journey to Byron's room more than once, so when she got to the window, she thought she had managed to sneak in unnoticed. And although Ayla got used to it, she was still very worried every time. I mentally asked Byron if he had become too smug lately. She suggested that from his point of view, it would not be easy to be on guard all the time. And even in front of the girl whom he himself cursed, and who was constantly irritated by this, most of the letters were burned. But looking around, she still found one that survived. She thought she should read it, although she found it strange that it was lying around like that. He never left letters he was going to send like that. She took it. The next day began just like all the previous ones. Our heroine trained. Earlier than usual, Claude said that that was enough for today, and that she was free. She looked at the coach with a little surprise, and he asked if she was okay. Answering yes, Ayla said that she would be happy to go for a walk in such weather. Having run away, she figured that this would arouse Claude's suspicions, but she wanted solitude. Her head was in such a mess, because yesterday she found out that her mother was expecting a second child. Stopping somewhere in the forest, she caught her breath. Her thoughts were confused. What should she do? Ayla knew it had been a long time since they had lost her. They always got along well, and it would be strange if they didn't have another child. When they found out that their only daughter was fake, they didn't change their behavior. But our heroine could not get rid of this obsessive feeling of awkwardness. Why did they change their minds this time? Did they stop waiting for her? Is there really no room for her in the Vashaven estate now, and she will be superfluous? If this baby is born and takes on the traits of each parent, noble and beautiful, and this child will not look like her at all, will they then forget about her? What if caring for this baby erases the memory of her from their hearts forever? She felt so sad and lonely from these thoughts, and not a single living soul felt sorry for her. She was afraid to even imagine that she might have to stay with Byron forever, and the life she had been preparing for in recent years may never happen. That distant future in which her parents will forget that she ever existed. The silence of the forest was pressing on her, and she so wanted them to just wait a little longer. Tears flowed like a river from her eyes. She had no right to be greedy. She wanted a little warmth. But no matter how unhappy she was at these moments, she still didn't want to be seen like this. Hearing some barely audible rustling in the bushes, our heroine became alert. But it was just an ordinary forest hare, and he too became wary when he saw her. The long ears moved and twitched a little, and Ayla stared at him. Suddenly, she heard a squeak. Then young hares jumped out of the bushes one by one. There turned out to be a whole family of them, and her heart was filled with tenderness and warmth. But they disappeared from sight as suddenly as they appeared, and she was left alone. She wanted to watch them a little longer, so she set off in pursuit. For some time, she was able to find them by the tracks they left in the snow. Then the tracks disappeared. She no longer knew where to run, and on top of that, the weather changed. A disgusting wet snow mixed with rain fell from the sky, and the wind blew. In such weather, the best thing to do was to take refuge in a warm estate and drink tea. At such moments, Ophelia's heart was filled with longing and memories of the past. The rain brought a feeling of sadness, which was noticeably reflected on the Duchess's face. In response to the Duke's question, Ophelia replied that, as usual, her thoughts had returned to the past, that she always regretted it and couldn't stop thinking about that day. She always blamed herself for Ayla's disappearance and for not trusting the nurse. She regretted that she had not been careful enough and had allowed this kidnapping to happen. Then she told her husband that she had never even thought about giving the world another life. She felt guilty towards her daughter, and in any case it seemed impossible to her, and she still longs for her firstborn. But she had no right to refuse a new life because of guilt. I mentally said that the weather is bad today, so where are you, my daughter lost? She asked Ayla for forgiveness, promising that she would raise this baby with love, and he will become another light that will wait to greet his sister one day. She asked them not to think that they had forgotten about her. On the contrary, her parents still loved her. Now they often imagine what another opportunity that day might have been, a future where they didn't leave her alone and shared this new joy together. Ophelia continued to dream that if only she could turn back time. The bad weather was really raging. A gusty wind was throwing lumps of snow onto the ground. Muddy puddles splashed under our heroine's feet, but she continued to run. She understood that after chasing the hares, she got lost and now didn't know where she was. She was so engrossed in thoughts about families that Ayla didn't even look where she was going. Now it was generally difficult to navigate. Everything around her seemed unfamiliar. To top it all off, she realized that she was soaking wet and it was already very late. Our heroine knew that Byron would not pat her on the head for being so late. When she finally saw a light in the distance, she ran so fast that she slipped. Byron and his henchmen were waiting for her on the porch, and apparently had been for a long time. Indignation flashed in his eyes, and he said without holding back that she was late. She heard his caustic question. Was the outside world really so pleasant? Exhausted from fatigue and cold, she replied that she was very sorry, she was mistaken. Without changing his angry tone, Byron asked if she was truly sorry, but she knew he wanted to see her grovel, and she decided to give him what he wanted. She lowered her head and stammered that she was asking for his forgiveness, at least this time. Byron remembered her mother, who once proudly said that she would find her own place, and how Ophelia asked for what reason she should apologize to His Highness. Isla was so similar to her mother that Byron wanted to humble her for this pride. He ordered that she not be allowed in today because she was enjoying the time away from him. Without listening to his close associates, he added that he should enjoy his freedom and then return. He believed that repentance should be sealed in the body. Laura tried to resist. Claude looked after the gentleman and then at his niece, who looked out the door, and no matter how sorry they were for the girl, they could not go against the will of the master. The unpleasant weather only worsened Ayla's internal state, but she fought. She told herself that even if she hadn't been late today, he would have found another excuse. Our heroine knew from her own bitter experience that the main thing now is not to panic. The pain is nothing, so she can cope. Then everything will be okay with her. Claude mentioned the frosts, to which the owner barked that that was why he left her outside. And they need to get ready, because the Duke of Vashaven has been spotted in the village. He hoped that he would stay in the West for a while after that incident 3 years ago. He added that they needed to hurry, so they tied up Ayla and threw her into the luggage compartment. And that looking at her face, it is clear whose bastard blood flows in her. He is not ready to bear her sight. After listening to this tirade, Claude thought that it looked like petty revenge and nothing more. The owner's actions always seemed impulsive to him, but wasn't he going too far? Claude remembered his brother and wondered why he followed someone like Byron. Pulling himself together, he decided that now he had no right to think about such things. Laura ran in, very worried, and reported that something was wrong with this girl. However, the gentleman himself saw that his ward had fallen to the ground like a sack. Ayla's death was not in his plans, so he ordered that she be taken care of. Claude and Laura ran to do it. They were already very worried about her health. Left alone, Byron continued to think about the imminent move. He cared little about how his order would be carried out. The main thing was that he showed her her place. As if through a fog, our heroine heard Claude trying to talk to her. She fell into oblivion. Suddenly she heard a soft voice. It was calling her. She thought it was her mother calling her name and asking her to wake up. It must be a dream, she thought. But it was so nice to hear that voice. He was so warm, almost hot, that she felt dizzy. Then everything changed. She couldn't even think normally. But another voice said that she needed to rest. Ayla heard that she could trust him, because she remembered what he promised her. He will pass on her words to the family. He will take care of everything. No one will be able to forget. They will never forget her. Ask not to forget that her parents are always there for her. And there is still someone who cares. And these were the last words heard in the dream. Our heroine slowly came to her senses, her consciousness shrouded in a soft fog. When she opened her eyes, she thought it was a ghost. But then she realized it was Claude. He asked if she was awake, but she only quietly said his name. She still didn't quite understand what was happening. The words were bursting out of her soul. Her heart was so hurt that she asked him why he had been deceiving her all this time. Realizing that the young lady was delirious, he did not answer. But the question worried him. He couldn't know what exactly she meant. But he was hiding too much. And he himself was not happy with the way they had been treating this child for many years. Thunder rumbled outside the window, and his heart was also pounding loudly. He was too excited. She quietly asked that it couldn't be that they knew about everything from the very beginning. Ayla didn't know exactly how many days she was bedridden. She hardly came to her senses. Then she was loaded into the cargo hold, and she had no idea where they were going. She was unconscious all the time, waking up only occasionally, and then only for a short time. From fragmentary memories, she understood that Claude carried her when necessary. At some point, seeing his face, it seemed to her that he was too worried. Not for long, but she was already beginning to think coherently, and the memories of that night were returning. She became worried that in her delirium, she had said something she shouldn't have. Claude returned and decided to check on the young lady again before leaving. Our heroine, looking into his face, tried to collect herself and understand the course of his thoughts. It was important to her now. He suddenly asked if she remembered her name. Laura's voice was heard nearby. It's timbre, our heroine will never forget. Claude asked what she was doing there, and she capriciously replied that she was working like crazy. Then she added more loudly that he still cared about this girl. I told him later that he himself understands that something has changed in recent years, and although she didn't say anything to the gentleman, he was still in a bad mood. When she asked what was going on, Claude quietly replied that he had come to check on the lady. Lowering his voice a little more, he explained that she remembered that this was the master's main weapon, and he was worried that, due to a sudden illness, she might break down prematurely. Hearing this, Ayla thought that a man who cared would never say such a thing. She almost fell for it. She must have imagined it all in her delirium. In recent days, Claude often wondered what if the young lady found out about everything. As he watched Laura leave, he thought that he didn't even know what he would do if that was the case. In order not to arouse unnecessary suspicion, he started talking about the final destination of their journey. He said that the route was not clear, but most likely to the east, which worried his niece. He then explained that the chase was an emergency, so plans could change. Laura began to fuss, and he remembered Caphalia's words that he should already make up his mind. If he likes this girl, then let him look at himself objectively from the outside, so that he would think about which child he should take care of, since his relatives are nearby. Suddenly, his niece told him not to worry. She would look after the lady. Around the same time, our young hero was enjoying a long-awaited trip. He was in high spirits and shared with Alexis that they were lucky with the weather. They arrived without any problems, and even a little earlier than the appointed time. The prince said that since they had decided to come to the master, it would be good to do it early. So Alexis reminded the heir that etiquette dictated that he simply had to arrive on time. But he had already been greeted, so he cheerfully told the guard that it had just happened that way. The Duke and Duchess also came out to meet them and asked how he was doing. The prince could not hide his sincere joy, because they had not seen each other for so long, and they were unable to see each other before leaving, for which the Duke apologized, citing business. Sir Roderick said he had been wondering all this time how His Highness was doing, and now he sees that Winfred has grown into such a wonderful guy and is almost an adult. The prince asked to see that he had become taller, and his voice had become deeper. Then he said that enough greetings, because he had congratulations prepared for them. Winifred added that he still had gifts prepared personally for them. The Duke, embarrassed, asked that the heir apparently liked to give a lot of gifts. Then the prince replied that there was another present to which he paid special attention. It was a custom-made rattle, and he should have mentioned it. Ophelia thanked him sincerely and explained that he made them laugh heartily. Winifred thought that they didn't seem as sad as they had 3 years ago. Before leaving, his father reminded him that the couple's first child had gone missing, and they were worried. But now they will have a new heir after they never found a daughter, so it's no wonder that grief still weighs heavily on them. The emperor asked to observe the reaction of the Duke's family when he presented the gifts. Father said that if their sadness exceeds their joy, then try to console them. However, the prince came to the conclusion that they looked more joyful than he expected. The Duchess said that the gifts had been presented, and that it was time to go inside instead of standing here. After all, it was a little awkward to keep a guest at the entrance, and the prince thought about what he should do. He wanted to tell about the magic box, because he was going to give it to the Duchess. But due to a combination of circumstances, he could not do this now and did not know how to tell. After all, it is very difficult to explain why he gave the box to a completely different person. I thought that if I talk about it now, it might cause an unnecessary reaction. What if Ayla's story reminds them of their lost daughter and upsets them even more? Then the thought occurred to him that Ayla was the same age as the missing lady. I noticed another detail. His savior looks very much like the Duchess. But he couldn't say this too hastily. He had to approach it wisely. If it turns out that she is only slightly similar, then she will only upset the Duchess in vain. But he couldn't just ignore it either, and didn't know how to say it more naturally. The prince looked so worried that the Duke became worried and asked about it. Winfred laughed it off, but began to look at the mistress of the house even more closely. Noticing this simply incredible similarity, the heir simply could not take his eyes off. The Duke decided that it would be better for him to leave them alone and, citing business, left. Ophelia advised her husband not to overdo it, and the heir panicked in horror. To calm the guest, the tactful Duchess asked what he wanted to say. The prince started from afar, but when she confirmed that she was from the Republic of Timora, he asked how common silver hair was in her homeland. Before he could correct his mistake, she replied that it was quite rare. She explained that she inherited them from her mother, but she doesn't think it's a characteristic color. She then added that this is now a distinctive feature of the Heiling family. Winifred began to remember that the Duchess's surname before marriage was exactly that. Now he looked at the mistress of the house with different eyes. Their similarity with Ayla was obvious. Then he mentally scolded himself, because how could he not have thought of this after so many years? After all, the Duke's family had always been friends with the Imperial family, and they knew a lot about each other. He understood that he needed to tell everything urgently, but when he jumped up, Ophelia became agitated. Gathering his courage, he blurted out that 3 years ago he met a girl in Primus. It was a completely random meeting, but she had exactly the same hair color. The Duchess spread her hands and said that it was unlikely that the girl had anything to do with them. However, the heir had already cleared all doubts, and he announced her name, Ayla Heiling. Ophelia turned suddenly pale. Her hands were restless. She couldn't believe it. Winifred understood the state of his interlocutor, but continued his story. The girl had silver hair, like the Duchess, and blue eyes like the master. Lowering his voice slightly, he repeated how she had introduced herself. Then he fell silent. Trying to control her feelings, our heroine's mother quietly repeated her daughter's name. Around the same time, a letter was written to the Duchess, apologizing for the delay. It took longer, and she became completely immersed in her work and schedule. She asked for a break, but she had just arrived at a port in the eastern part of the empire. She said that they would see each other soon, but asked not to throw a lavish reception. She wrote that, as for Ophelia's condition, she would prefer to see it in person. She was still able to write that the best magician in the country was not her, when she ran out of ink. Besides, she was in a hurry, so she decided to tell the rest when they met. So Candace Euphosia, the headmistress of the Tamara Republican Academy, was rushing to the Duchess. Without looking at her feet, she fell, and the old clerk obligingly helped her gather her things. He said she muttered about being from Tamora and crossing the sea. Therefore, he advised her to remove some of the things from her luggage, as the roads were dangerous. There are now many bandits on the local mountain trails, and they rob any traveler. He advised taking less things and using a private carriage. Candace said the area used to be very different, and he asked if this was her first time in the Empire. The clerk added that a lot had changed for the worse here over the past 3 years. He also said that for some reason, Western criminals had infiltrated here. She thanked him for his help and continued on her way with a heavy heart, thinking that Ophelia had better hurry up and find her daughter as soon as possible. She couldn't even imagine how close she was to solving the mystery at that moment. A carriage passed by her, unremarkable in any way, with an ordinary driver, and it was impossible to see the girl with silver hair behind the boxes. Although maybe if Candace had turned her head and Isla had stuck her head out, everything would have been different. But our heroine was strictly forbidden to appear on the street without a disguise. When the Duke returned to the living room, he too was told that Ayla had been seen in Primus. Our hero sincerely apologized for not telling about it back then, but he simply couldn't. It seemed like the girl was in a dangerous situation, and he couldn't casually mention it. Then Winifred said that Isla had a message. She asked him to give it to her parents. She asked me to keep it a secret from others. She said that she would definitely come back, that even if she couldn't meet them now, she hoped they would wait. The heir fulfilled his promise, but now it was terribly painful for him to look at them. He thought she didn't need to ask for it because her parents were already waiting for her. They have waited and will continue to wait, and one look is enough to understand this. Having calmed down, the Duchess asked for forgiveness for such a display of emotion in his presence. The heir replied that there was no need to apologize. He understood, after all. It was such news. Encouraged, he asked if that girl was the young lady of this house. Ophelia, laughing, replied that they met because they were destined to do so. To his surprised look, she explained that His Highness was engaged to their daughter. The Duke tried to interrupt his wife, so she said it was partly a joke. Blushing with embarrassment, our hero stuttered and asked again if Ayla was his fiancée. He was already embarrassed about his feelings for this girl, and now there was such news. When he asked her to explain what he meant, the owner of the house said that it had been a long time ago. It was a beautiful day, and 2 families gathered in the imperial garden to socialize. The Empress called her son to eat, but he replied that he was very busy at the moment. Not understanding what could be so preoccupying young Winfred, she asked him to explain. Then he replied that he wasn't actually busy, but he couldn't stop looking at Ayla. This was such a funny statement from the little prince that everyone started laughing. His father then jokingly asked his son what he thought the girl was beautiful, and everyone laughed again. The emperor continued, saying that things would not go this way, and that they had to conclude an engagement. In response, the Duke asked him not to joke like that, and his friend responded by asking him what was wrong with him as a father-in-law. To the young prince's question, the mother replied that an engagement is a promise to marry, and this is to spend life together, love each other, and swear to always protect. Our little hero pondered the words spoken by the Mother Empress. Then, tearing his gaze away from his future bride, he joyfully announced that he was ready to get married. The Duke noted with displeasure that it was still too early to discuss this, which amused the emperor, and he asked his friend not to take it so seriously, although the offer was sincere. Sir Roderick continued to burn a hole in the emperor, and the baby made a decision. When the Duchess had finished, our hero thought that it was even more awkward than he had imagined. Ophelia saw the heir's confusion and added that he was so persistently nice. Then she said that it was one of the most beautiful and warmest days in her life. And if he gets married, then his future life will also be filled with such days. And she thanked the heir, because now she can start dreaming about the future again. The prince thought that it was said with such warmth, and he was late with his promise. He didn't know if he would ever be able to repay for the warmth, and then suddenly it dawned on him. Meanwhile, the unremarkable carriage carried our heroine further and further. Byron ordered that the horses not be driven too hard, so as not to attract unnecessary attention. So when the man appeared, the driver stopped the cart quite calmly. He didn't immediately recognize Claude, who was doing a pretty good job of imitating a highwayman. Claude protested, because he wanted to look like an ordinary fur merchant. He said that security had been increased, and he had to ensure the safety of the entire route. But he did not say that he was worried about the lady's condition, but went to check on her. When he asked her to go out, she asked if they had arrived yet and crawled out from behind the boxes. He didn't have to be a doctor to not be able to tell from her appearance that she had not recovered. Laura, having confirmed the fever, asked what would happen if the lady drank the potion in such a state. Uncle replied that Isla's health could not be neglected and ordered that the cloak simply be brought. His niece was not happy that he was so worried about this girl. While arguing, they didn't notice what was behind them, but Ayla saw the guards. Deciding not to attract attention, Claude quietly asked Laura not to interfere. He reminded her that they were traitors, and then asked our heroine to put on her hood. The security apologized for the disturbance, but they had to check their documents and luggage. They also asked the travelers to tell where they were going, and for what reason. Continuing to play his role, Claude began to tell a fictitious legend, but before he could even finish, the senior security guard asked for a trading license. While the elder was talking with the imaginary traders, the second guard became thoughtful. Claude, pretending to be looking for an account book, began to fuss and shift from one foot to the other, and the guard thought that he had definitely seen this merchant somewhere before. Looking closely at Claude's face, he noticed a scar, and it was impossible to mistake it. He could not hesitate for a second, so he drew his sword and rushed to attack the criminal. When asked what he was doing, the vigilant guard replied that this man was wanted. While parrying the blow of the sword, he explained that it was one of those advertisements that came every month. And since they didn't understand him the first time, he shouted that they were leaving for reinforcements. Claude guessed who recognized him 3 years ago and realized that now a battle was inevitable. Cursing Alexia, I thought I needed to quickly kill everyone and run away before things got worse. Suddenly, the guard felt that he could barely hold the weapon in his hands. He tried to concentrate, but he couldn't. He was clearly weakened. Then he saw the child. She got out of the cart and asked permission to fight. She said that this was her only chance to test her own strength. Claude asked her not to interfere because she was in no condition to fight. Isla asked, because if not now, then when would she be able to gain combat experience? She thought to herself that he was going to kill all the knights. She couldn't allow that. The guard told them not to run away because they wouldn't call for reinforcements for her. But they weren't going to listen to some girl, and she asked to give her a weapon. The knights debated whether they should call for reinforcements, but decided to listen to her. The captain said they didn't have enough skill to win, but they had to try to survive and gather some information, and another knight stepped forward to fight her. Claude thought it over carefully and decided to give the girl a chance to show her skills. So he said he was giving her 30 minutes for those 3, and then he would intervene. But on the condition that nothing would change during this time, she was satisfied with this proposal. However, the knights were at a loss, because 3 of them would go against 1 child. She cheerfully declared that they should not underestimate her because of her age and rushed into battle. When Byron showed up and they told him everything, he said in surprise, "So that's what happened." Then he added questioningly whether his daughter had really killed those 3 knights single-handedly. But neither Laura nor the driver had anything to add to this. Everything that was said was true. After looking around the clearing, Byron thought that Ayla was bound to make an excellent swordsman. But in reality, our heroine only wounded the knights, and she had to hide it. By sticking the dagger in, she attracted the attention of one guard and told him to be quiet. Then she quietly added that if they were caught, they would all definitely be dead. The knight believed her, because she had deliberately avoided important points and only turned them off. Claude said that Ayla promised to personally deal with any reinforcements that arrived. Byron replied if that was too much, then she said she wanted to be useful to her father. He laughed and said that he always knew what a kind daughter he had grown up to be. Suddenly, the thought occurred to her that now she had a weapon and she could kill him. Her hands shook. She could plunge this sword straight into his defenseless heart. It was a wonderful opportunity that may never come again, but she couldn't. She had to endure it while this curse was imprinted on her body. Instead, turning around, she thanked him for the praise and called him father. The prince without a title was pleased and asked to come closer to look at her. After examining her, He noticed that she had tried so hard that she was all dirty, and he removed the hood. He wanted to check her hair and was glad when he found it intact. The knight wondered where the first prince got a daughter, and one with silver hair too. Meanwhile, Claude reminded them that it was time for them to get going again. Time was running out. The knight, realizing that Byron would definitely run away, tried to gather his strength and stand up. But Ayla quietly ordered him not to move, and then to gather his comrades. She added, barely audibly, that they shouldn't think of sending a surveillance team after them, and that she is not on Byron's side. It's just not the time yet to tell her comrades either. Claude asked our heroine to hurry, and the knight kept wondering who this lady was. Having regrouped and transferred all the provisions into one cart, Byron set off. Already on the road, he told the others that Caphalia had not yet arrived, and they would go after her. And they don't head for the shelter, because security is tighter than expected. The owner still didn't know where it would be best to go, and Claude suggested the dungeon. He said that they had collected a decent amount of resources and could get help. Our heroine listened attentively to their conversation and tried to understand what they were talking about. But Byron didn't want to go to that dirty place. He still remembered what he had experienced there before. He said that 11 years there was more than enough time for him to return. At the end, Byron thoughtfully said that perhaps they were heading to Inselkopf. For Claude and his niece, this was a complete surprise, because this is a different country. Seeing their surprise, Byron explained that he knew a smuggler and he would help. And as soon as they cross, the Count will most likely prepare a shelter for them. Then he ordered Claude to make sure that the coachman drove according to instructions. Alexia loudly asked who exactly had returned from that battle with Byron's men. Seeing the wounded man, she realized that it was him and was going to ask him a couple of questions. The knight was asked to wait a little, but the guard said that he wanted to report himself. He understood how important this information could be, because there was a girl there. The wounded man gave a detailed account of what the lady with silver hair had done. The knight remembered well that when she was exploring Primus, they talked about a girl, and then they found a strand of silver hair on the cloak and the crown prince. There was little information then, but now Alexia could say Lady Isla was with Byron. The guard added that before leaving, the girl said something very strange. She conveyed that now was not the right time to start catching Byron. Alexia thought. It turned out that the lady used that family's sword technique. So, Isla was raised as Byron's daughter, but she knows who she is. All these facts told Alexia that the girl was smart, and she doubted that she was lying. The knight was offered to immediately send a surveillance team, and then they would pick up the trail. Alexia decided not to poison them, and for everyone who was there to remain silent. Those present had questions about this decision, and she explained that based on the facts that they know, this girl may be held hostage, and if they recklessly pursue Byron, they will endanger this child. Therefore, she decided to immediately return to the capital to report everything. The crown prince was returning from a horse ride and ran into a knight as he approached. They exchanged greetings, after which Winifred said that she had frightened him, explaining that he had not expected the knight to urgently have to travel so far to the east. Dexon replied that she could not leave the heir alone on the Duke's estate, but he replied that he had no complaints, since he was able to spend the night with his mentor. Sir Roderick, given what had happened the day before, was also getting ready to go to the palace. Winifred was more curious as to why his best knight was leaving so quickly, but seeing that the Duke was also getting ready, she said that she would report everything at the residence. The Emperor urgently called an emergency meeting to discuss the latest news, and based on all that was stated, those gathered came to the conclusion that Lady Ayla was alive, and because of the Emperor's brother, she had to leave a message so that they would not be followed. Then he looked around the meeting and asked what their thoughts were. He expected the Duke, the girl's father, to speak first, but he remained silent. Alexia reported that this lady possessed all the qualities of a true swordmaster. Not everyone can fight off trained knights alone, but she did it. But then the question remained open as to why she stayed of her own free will. The prince said that 3 years ago he had the impression that the lady might leave at any moment, and she wouldn't have promised that she could come back if she wasn't sure of it. After listening, the Emperor came to the conclusion that the Duke's daughter had some reason. It seems to be a very compelling one, but they have no idea what it might be. The Duke then proposed to conduct a noble audit of the imperial organs. His Majesty asked whether it was really necessary to involve all the nobility in this. Sir Roderick replied that they had followed Byron to the western region, and they found shelter, but they arrived too late, and the building was already empty. There were signs of rapid escape, but the amount of cargo was significant. For a force of that magnitude to disappear so quickly, they had to be covered. The emperor was dissatisfied, since it was possible that a foreign power and help from within were involved. The duke said he knew for sure that the rebel group was still active. Then the emperor said that when he inherited the throne, he issued a certain decree. It said that the punishment of the remaining rebels had to be carried out with particular caution, and the duke was one of the key people who was entrusted with leading this. The emperor and Sir Roderick had a serious argument, but each stood his ground. After talking for some time in raised tones, the old friends calmed down. The heir tried several times to get a word in edgewise, but was never able to do so. His Majesty said he would find out the names from the ministry, and the duke would make a plan. Alexia told the prince that the two had always been like this, and that over time you get used to it. And Vin replied that it was rare to have such a friend and subordinate in one person. Then, his father advised him to value the people with whom fate itself brings him together. Then they returned to discussing the reason why the young lady was unable to return. The duke said it was purely a hypothetical proposition, but he wanted to get to the bottom of it. He must do his part to become the kind of father she would be proud of. Looking at the moon, Candace thought that maybe she wouldn't find the right informant right away. But she had no other choice, and the driver advised her to be careful. And it's no wonder that the area she found herself in has recently been flooded with dangerous types. The driver reminded her that he was giving her exactly 3 hours to sort out her affairs and return. The street she came out onto looked terrible, and the headmistress thought that this was just the thing. In a rough area like this, it's easy to get some information, and those two are too honest to think of coming to such a place. So, as their best friend, she had to try to find the informant. And to start with, she decided to go to the largest tavern she saw. She heard screams in the distance and rushed over to find out what was going on. She didn't like the scene she saw. She couldn't leave the stranger in danger. She saw the girl trying to get out of the situation and decided to help as much as she could. She was ready to use magic, but an unforeseen circumstance prevented it. Another stranger appeared from somewhere above and deftly landed on the man. Everything happened so quickly that none of the men had time to react. Our heroine also went out for an evening walk, and the scuffle tickled her nerves. Having quickly dealt with one, she rushed to the second before he ran away. Or even worse, he didn't try to help his comrade. His screams didn't bother her. On the contrary, his question about who the girl was only fueled her fighting spirit. Before Candace could blink, 2 healthy men were knocked out. For a few moments, there was silence on the street. Then footsteps were heard. The girl who had just been rescued reported that her father was very unhappy about being late. But it wasn't the words that made Candace freeze. It was those blue eyes that she saw. When her feelings returned to her, she thought that the stranger was an unusual girl. She tried to talk, asking if they could spare just a couple of minutes. But they just looked at her strangely and didn't answer. Laura thanked the young lady for being there so suddenly. The headmistress tried to speak to them again, but this attempt was also unsuccessful. She didn't understand why she was being ignored, because she just wanted to talk. In order not to be late for the carriage, she had to use the magic watch. She looked after the stranger and tried to figure out what exactly had interested her so much. I thought that there was no point in indulging her curiosity, since she was here on other business. She needs to gather information to help find her friend's missing daughter. But if it is destined, she will meet this amazing girl again. At the same time, the following events were taking place in a nearby tavern. Byron was extremely unhappy that he had been refused and would not be able to get a ride. He shouted that he was sure it was all about the payment. And at that moment, our heroine walked in. Laura said that he had just brought some water so that the young lady could take the potion. Byron asked why his interlocutor had changed his mind, and he said that that was not the issue. He explained that the situation had changed, and there were suspicions that a traitor had lurked nearby. Having said that, he had only come across corpses along the way. He turned around. Then Byron asked why such a rumor had spread. Maybe there was a survivor. Claude came up and unexpectedly, for our heroine, said that it was his mistake. He needed to double-check everything, because this was the first time the lady had fought with anyone. Byron agreed with this, but then he wondered if it was just a mistake. Or Claude means that he did it on purpose. And Isla held her breath. Keeping the lady from doing anything rash, Claude replied that of course not. Then the next question was how he was going to answer for his mistake. With just a turn of his head and the look in his eyes, he advised her to leave. And although she understood that he was setting himself up for her sake, this was the best option. After pausing for just one more second, our heroine began to climb up to her room. At first, she walked slowly up the steps so as not to attract attention. Then she quickly flew into her room and thought about Byron. What exactly he had planned. The main question for her remained whether Claude had actually noticed something. She thought that even if he had guessed something, there was no point in him trying to cover for her. After all, he had no reason to help her, or he was just being kind to her. She wondered why he kept doing this. And then she remembered Winifred's words. At that meeting, he told her that she needed to learn to accept what she deserved. It was good advice, except for one thing, she didn't know what she really deserved. There was a noise from below, and she listened. But everything quickly died down. She returned to her thoughts, which did not make her feel any better. Ayla couldn't even imagine that someone could be genuinely kind to her. The Crown Prince had a certain talent for drawing, and he decided to take advantage of it. Having finished the sketch, I thought that even though I drew it myself, I was still pleased with the result. It seemed to work, so now all that was left was to insert the drawing into the frame. The prince drew from memory, but the main thing is that he managed to capture the main features. There was a knock at the door, and when he allowed them to enter, a maid appeared on the threshold. It was Vinka. She brought the heir some tea and asked how his work was progressing. The prince said that she was on time and asked to tell the security to bring the frame. Having accepted her congratulations, he asked her forgiveness for constantly loading her with work. After all, she had just returned from vacation, to which she asked him not to worry, and she said thoughtfully that the fact that she had just come back from vacation was only part of the plan. She continued to fuss with the tea, and he, noticing this, said that she was always kind to him. Smiling, he added that she knows how to create coziness even in small things, and that is valuable. Smiling in response, I asked who he had been drawing so diligently these last few days. However, Winifred had no intention of telling anyone about this. It was his secret. Vinka waited for an answer, and predatory sparkles appeared in her eyes, which he did not notice. The prince did not want to share this drawing for the time being, so he apologized. He added, embarrassed, that he was embarrassed to talk about it, but it was too personal, to which Vinka replied that she understood, because after all, she was an ordinary servant. Even more embarrassed, Winifred said that it was not that, but she was already leaving. Before leaving, she wished him a good rest and did not forget to convey his request. She flirted with the guard a little more and then hurried away. She had reason to worry. Everything was not going according to plan, as she had expected. Left alone, she began to reflect on the current situation. The effect was not what it should have been, and this fact continued to bother her greatly. When she asked how she got involved in this, the answer was that nothing would come of it. This magical tool has always had some limit, and it is experimental, and she was the only one who wanted it. Although everything was explained to her, the greedy young lady, the effect was unstable, so she asked to improve it or change it. She was refused because she did not understand how complex mental interference magic was. She wasn't worth the effort, and while her blood was interesting, it was nothing more. And if she doesn't want to be caught while breaking into the palace, then it's better not to bother. In the end, the shadow only added that he had fulfilled his part of the contract, and that was all. The spell dissipated, sunbeams appeared outside the window, and Vinka was left alone. A security guard passing by asked what she was doing there. He didn't recognize her face. The maid was too absorbed in her thoughts to answer immediately, but she had already made her decision and was not going to back down. She was a servant of the imperial palace. So, smiling coquettishly, she replied that he decided to tease her since she was back from vacation. Our young hero was somewhat stunned when he returned to his mentor's estate. A stranger stood at the threshold and announced that, after his official business at the palace, she greets him with genuine enthusiasm and then introduces herself as Candace. Winifred froze for a few moments, then looked at Sir Roderick. He was completely calm, so the prince accepted the challenge and replied, "It's cute." Then he heard the Duchess say that he did not have to support this game. Genuinely amused, she introduced her friend Candace, who had come to visit them. The headmistress explained that she had decided to play a little joke when she learned that the Duke was returning. But if it's not the right time, and they have an important conversation, then she can wait in the living room. As it turned out, the crown prince is here on a personal visit. He brought a gift. Winifred said that since Isla couldn't come back yet, he decided to comfort them. He painted this portrait from memory because they don't know what she looks like as an adult. So he took the liberty of deciding that it was worth showing them, at least this way. Candace was the most surprised. It turned out that the stranger was the missing daughter. The Vashhaven couple listened to the heir's words that they must remain strong. The headmistress thought that her friend seemed happy. But how did the prince know Ayla? She didn't immediately intervene in the conversation, but she knew for sure that she would find out everything later. Our heroine loved this kind of weather, this blue sky and the clouds floating across it. These were the few moments when she could at least enjoy a little peace. However, Laura had already called her, and when she entered, she saw that the lady was standing at the open window. Furious, she said that silver hair should not be shown. It was noticeable. Having calmed down a little, she added with annoyance that the lady was becoming more and more disobedient. When asked about her health, Ayla replied that she was feeling much better now. Laura gave our heroine a potion and said that there was a long road ahead and she couldn't get sick. She also complained that the lady had no idea how hard it was to care for the sick. From below, they heard Byron's voice asking how soon they would be down. By answering that now, Laura said that her body did not belong to her alone, adding that the owner would be very upset if anything happened to the young lady. But Ayla remembered this very well, and for this reason, she still hadn't run away. She didn't want to hurt her loved ones in the future with her thoughtless actions. She still had hope that even in this altered future, she could return. Now she could only move forward, overcoming all the difficulties along the way. She often wondered when this one-way road would end, but she didn't have an answer to that question yet, so she kept moving forward. Their journey came to an end, and they managed to cross the border without any misadventures. At the estate, Byron and his company were met by the owner, Count Erner Senosfon. Byron asked in a displeased tone why the count was laughing, since he had been suffering the whole way. And it's all the fault of that idiotic leader whom the owner of the estate recommended to him. Having replied that this was the specific nature of smuggling, Lord Erner suggested moving on to the main thing, and he introduced his son, saying that this was Gerald, the heir of the Senosfon family. Our heroine looked closely at her offspring and realized that she didn't like him. She couldn't say what it was about this arrogant young man that repulsed her most. He, without any embarrassment, looked at her from head to toe, as if she were a thing. The prince listened to the story of how Candace met Isla during her journey. She lamented that she could not understand why those blue eyes did not give her peace. At the Duchess's request, the headmistress calmed down and told everything in order. Then Ophelia guessed that her daughter had left the country, and the Duke confirmed this. He tried to calm his wife down, reminding her that his daughter herself had asked him not to persecute them. Explaining this, they cannot send surveillance without knowing what threats await them. And he added that it might be painful to let her go, but perhaps it would be better this way. For a second, the Duchess felt so alone in this crazy world, but she had no time to feel sorry for herself. She had to figure out how they could help her daughter return. She loudly stated her position that Ayla must be isolated from any threat. The Duke, reassuring her, replied that it was therefore better to first conduct reconnaissance. This slow approach did not suit the hostess of the house, and she said so directly. She suggested using distracting maneuvers to minimize the danger. Candace, tired of this useless argument, called on the couple to stop immediately. They looked around a little surprised, but she wasn't embarrassed by the fact that she had to intervene. When she got their attention, she said that their bickering was getting nowhere, and Ayla would hardly want that, especially since her parents love her equally. They just each had different approaches, so Candace suggested they calm down. She said that they needed to think about it, and then together they would surely find a solution. This was a very sound idea, so the owners of the house listened to this advice. The headmistress held her position for a reason, so she could attract attention. Winifred expressed concern that Byron would notice the pursuit and harm Isla. The Duchess suggested magical surveillance, since he had no magical specialists. The heir thought some thought was spinning around in his mind, but he couldn't grasp it. Candace said it seems Byron is using underground artifacts, like scrolls. Winifred had an idea and told everyone that he remembered, and there was a way to track it. He said that Ayla has a magic box, and that she herself leaves no traces. But it was made by the Duchess, and can't the creator determine the location? This was, of course, true. But there was one snag, and the mistress of the house became despondent. The heir waited for an answer. Then Candace asked if her friend hadn't reported this. Ophelia apologized because she thought she had already reported this, but apparently not. She felt awkward, but she admitted that she had lost all her magic 3 years ago, and that now she can no longer call herself a magician. Candace confirmed her words. Then the headmistress of the academy added that this was precisely the reason she had come. Medicine has not been able to figure out why, and it wants to study this phenomenon. Ophelia raised a thoughtful face and said, "It seems there is a way to track the box." She started talking about the fact that there is a method of tracking artifacts using unique waves. When activated, the magic leaves behind waves, and a spell must be created to recognize them. There are 2 types of waves: normal natural magic waves and unique personality waves. The latter can be tracked. The skill of the magician is determined by how much he hides and reveals them. And no matter how well the waves are camouflaged, a high-ranking mage will detect them. Candace said that there is currently no mage stronger than the Duchess, and tracking is impossible. Ophelia said that her friend was young then, and that's why everything was explained to her more simply. And she continued, even if she lost her strength, the created artifact retained its properties. She explained that if a magician stronger than her appeared, the problem could be solved. And there is no need to hide it. She knows one excellent magician, and he is standing in front of her. The Duchess looked straight at her friend and said that she would pass on her knowledge to her. And then she slyly asked if Candace was ready to become the greatest magician on the continent. Although the director was not ready for such a turn of events, she agreed for the sake of the matter. Gerald said he still believes women need to be more modest. They were sitting in the dining room, and she barely knew him, so she didn't understand his line. She didn't like him at all, and his arrogance was simply unbearable. His compliment that she had refined manners actually gave her heartburn. She didn't want to talk to him at all, but she couldn't refuse in this situation. She had no memory of him in the past, so she had little information. Trying to dig up at least something about him in her memory, she plunged into her thoughts. He rudely asked if she was even listening to him, and then asked her name. Unfazed by her silence, he decided to guess and said, maybe with the letter R. When she stated that she had no name, Gerald said that she didn't have to tell. How could she explain, since she really had nothing to say to that? Of course, her name was Ayla, but this current her wasn't supposed to know that. Then he decided that he would figure out what to call her himself, and noted her pinkish blonde hair. After thinking for a bit, he suggested calling her Blondie, which was too much for her. Unable to bear it, she asked what she could do to make him stop paying attention to her. Her answer was, how could he not pay attention? They would be engaged. Seeing her surprise, he asked why she thought the adults had left them alone. He added with a smile that his parents were discussing their future wedding at dinner. However, Byron had a different opinion on this matter. He would not allow this engagement. Sitting comfortably in an armchair, he announced this to the owner of the house, and he asked why. After all, this would strengthen their alliance, to which Byron replied that he would reveal one secret to the Count. This girl is not his daughter. She is just a hunting dog that he raised. Does the Count really want to ruin his son's future by lusting after this worthless girl? The owner of the house did not immediately understand what was meant, and the guest advised him to think carefully. And then he told him not to dare to greedily reach for what belongs to him. Milord Erner could not contain his surprise. He could not believe it. And Byron repeated that she was just a dog that he had raised with such difficulty. The owner of the house had no choice but to accept this and look for another match. Moreover, he had other business with the guest that he was counting on. When he received the documents, he happily said that with this, the royal family would believe. The prince, deprived of his title, had a very low opinion of the Count and almost despised him. I considered him a blockhead who could only grovel because of his greed. He knew that the Count was still living off his predecessor's money, but the end was near. Byron had already thought through the end of the Count's serenity, but out loud he advised to continue. Gerald continued to ask his guest if she could embroider. How well does he play the piano? Can he make tea and tie a tie? And when she marries him, he will rid her of this tasteless dress. He continued about how his family was about to become a ducal house, and he would buy another one, a dress worthy of her beauty, for a duchess must maintain her reputation. He drove her crazy, but while she was here as a guest, she couldn't do anything. Isla guessed that if she made this guy angry, Byron might punish her. She couldn't afford to get sick again and lose her memory like last time. She thought that she had to endure it as long as she could. But he had already found her. And then her reaction, honed over years of grueling training, kicked in. Without thinking about the consequences, our heroine grabbed his hand at the wrist. The next moment, he was already lying on the ground, puffing and showing displeasure. She looked at him with such an expressive look that he fell silent for a second. But almost immediately, he came to his senses and was about to, perhaps, even slap her. He didn't have time. Everything happened so quickly that the lady didn't understand where Claude came from. In response to the guy's cry, Claude replied that he was a security guard and would not allow the young lady to be threatened. Gerald shouted that he was a commoner and had no right to insult his master. After listening to this angry tirade, she thought that he did not know who Claude was. She even found it a little funny to watch this count's offspring trying to threaten. He really had no idea who he was taking his anger out on now. However, Claude was like an impregnable rock, and Gerald's feigned ardor ended. At some point, it dawned on the owner's son that it would be better for him not to get involved with them. After watching the escape, Claude asked our heroine if she was wounded. Mentally exhaling, Ayla thought that she could have handled that oaf herself. Then she looked up at her savior and saw beads of sweat on his neck. A strange thought came into her head, that he had apparently run here because of her. Without turning his head, he suddenly said that the talk of an engagement must be a lie. When she asked how he knew, he replied that the owner was unlikely to let her go just like that. And although these words sounded incredibly offensive to her, they were convincing. Their conversation took place quite far away in the garden, but did not go unnoticed. The watchful Byron did not miss the fact that the two were talking about something again. He wondered what now, because he didn't need any extra worries. People under his command must obey his orders without question, and nothing else. Winifred heard his name being called, and he could recognize that voice among 1,000 others. It was Ayla, asking him for forgiveness for not being able to see him. He ran to her and asked what she meant, because this simply couldn't be. He shouted to her that the teacher was trying very hard. He was looking for any clues and following the tracks. That even her friend Candace started studying magic again to help. The answer was that it was not about that. Everything was much more complicated. She was engaged. The air woke up in a cold sweat, the dream still standing before his eyes. What was that? He thought. And then he felt a little better, because it was just a dream. However, it continued to disturb him. He saw and felt everything so clearly. The air could not let go of this vision when he heard light steps. It was Vinka who came. He asked if he had gone to bed late yesterday, and she asked if something was wrong. The prince reluctantly replied that he had had a disturbing dream, and she offered to listen. But it wasn't information he would have shared, even if it had been his father. He thanked the maid, however, because she was so kind to him and especially attentive. When he asked her if such service was tiring, she replied that it was an honor for her to serve him. And this may sound presumptuous, but she considers him her little brother. This maid had been serving him for a long time, but lately she sometimes surprised him. She had never told him about her family or her past before. And then suddenly, she started saying that in fact, she had a brother the same age as him. He became curious to hear that she had met her brother recently. Before my mother's death, I learned that there was a relative from whom I was separated in childhood. On her deathbed, her mother told her not to continue her life alone, and to go to the capital to find that child there, and she fulfilled the request. At first, I came to the city without any plans, and then I found my younger brother. Now they are becoming closer, and she is so happy that she can take care of him. Vinka spoke thoughtfully about how they were making up for lost time. Our hero listened to the maid's story and was sincerely happy about how happy she was. This little idol was interrupted by the butler's voice. He started shouting from the doorway. He rarely allowed himself to raise his voice in the presence of gentlemen, but here he could not restrain himself. Looking at the maid, he said that he clearly remembered that he had ordered everyone to attend to the reception. Vinka made a surprised face and replied that she had not received such an order. When the heir asked why the butler was so stern, he cleared his throat a little, and he said that the prince should now interact less with members of the opposite sex. Then he reminded that His Highness would soon reach adulthood. Therefore, we cannot allow gossip to start spreading now. The prince listened to this speech in silence, but still decided to teach the old servant a lesson in his own way. But this didn't seem enough to him, and he asked how he dared to say such a thing to his face. The butler replied that only the prince listens to the maid, and rumors are born from trifles. When asked if it was possible to refute the false rumors, he said that it might already be too late. The word late did not satisfy the heir, and he said that he had no attachments. And although he remembered Ayla, he still could not admit to himself his feelings for her. The butler was old and experienced, so he said he knew what the heir had. Winifred denied this fact, and the servant replied that so be it. But in the future, it will definitely appear, adding that they don't want people to misunderstand the prince after hearing rumors. The butler's speech was convincing and not at all devoid of common sense. Therefore, Vin could not disagree and said that he would be more careful in the future. Having finished this discussion, he looked at his schedule for today and was stunned. The butler explained everything to him quickly and in a humorous but clear manner. Why so much? Be that as it may, our hero trusted this old butler like no one else. Moreover, now he couldn't change anything anyway. But in due time, he will show himself. He missed Ayla, but he wasn't the only one, and everyone was making efforts to get her back. Candace studied hard, and the Duchess passed on to her all the knowledge she had accumulated. Knights from all the borders of the empire brought all kinds of information. The Duke and the Emperor often held emergency meetings and discussed news. And although these were tense days, the general unity gave confidence. With Claude's support, our heroine decided to take fate into her own hands. The first thing she needed was some kind of weapon at hand for protection. Armed with a chair leg, she was ready to act at her own risk. Having barely escaped Gerald's attention, she set up an ambush in the bushes. And although she continued to distrust Claude, she could not do without him. After all, his behavior repeatedly confirmed his attitude towards her. Even now, when their plan was completely unpredictable, he helped her. With a completely innocent look, he managed to deliver her a hot drink. And she, without leaving her secluded place, enjoyed the minutes of waiting. Time, as always, ran inexorably forward. Days flew by in worries and troubles. And the day arrived that the Duke of Vashaven's family had been waiting for with such impatience. The news spread quickly throughout the estate. The Duchess had given birth safely. The Duke took the baby in his arms and smiled with the tenderness that only a father can show. At that moment, looking at this little gentleman, the Duke's eyes stung. He thanked his wife for this moment and said that she had endured everything with courage. This little bundle of joy now occupied all their thoughts, because he was beautiful. Like many parents before them, those who would come after them looked for familiar features. Candace also came running as soon as the news reached her wing of the house. The Duke said she could have stayed and done her research instead of rushing here, but she could not stand aside and not be one of the first to see her nephew. Then she said that now that she saw how cute he was, she could leave peacefully. Ophelia didn't understand why her friend decided to leave them so suddenly. Candace then reported that she felt she had overcome this internal barrier. The Duchess was glad to hear this, but at the same time, she was not ready to part with her friend. But on the other hand, Candace will now have to go in search of her eldest daughter. The headmistress smiled and said that she kindly asked them to wait a little longer.